Hello, today we're going to be talking about the three branches of government. And although this video is particular to Canada, it really is applicable to most countries. So let's get right into it. The legislative branch of government is the branch of government that passes laws. And it's made up of a few elements. The first one is the sovereign. And the sovereign in Canada is the head of state. And the head of state is Queen Elizabeth II. And most of us know Queen Elizabeth II as the Queen of England. So she lives in London. She doesn't have all that much time for Canada. As a result, she has her permanent representative in Canada, which is the Governor General. And the Governor General is the person who represents the Queen on a daily basis in Canada. And the reason the sovereign is important in our system, in the legislative branch, is because for a bill to become law, it has to receive royal assent. And that's basically official jargon to mean that the Queen has to sign off on a bill. And again, if the Queen's not here, which she mostly isn't, it's the Governor-General that signs off, which is called royal assent. The second branch of, or the second element rather, of the legislative branch of government is the one that most of us normally think about when we think about the legislative branch of government, and that's Parliament. And Parliament is in Ottawa, and it itself is made up of two branches. The first one is the, we'll start with the lower house. So the lower house. And the lower house are the MPs. So I'll write MP for Member of Parliament. And currently, there are 308 MPs in Canada. And each MP in Canada represents a riding or a constituency. You could use these synonymously, a riding or constituency in Canada. And the ridings or constituency are made up of Canadians. So the more Canadians in a particular geographic area, the more number of ridings there'll be in that area. So for example, let's take Toronto. There are a lot of people in our biggest city of Toronto, so that means there are quite a few ridings in Toronto. That means there's going to be a lot more MPs. So we could think about it, if there are more people, there are more MPs, that area probably has more power because they have more people that could make laws in Canada. Let's take PEI, Prince Edward Island, which is not a city but a whole province in Canada. They have a lot less people than even the city of Toronto. Because they have less people, they have also less ridings, so less MPs. And because of that, they have less power. As a result of the huge influence population has in Canada, when the Founding Fathers created our country, they decided to have also an upper house. Since we have a lower house, we also have an upper house. And in the upper house, we have the Senate. And if in the upper house it was population, I'll write pop for population, in the lower house, it's regionally balanced. It's regionally balanced. So the senators are basically to give a counterweight to the number of MPs there are in really population densely areas. So for example, there's going to be more senators in PEI, in Prince Edward Island, in order to balance out the regional inequalities in power. And that's a theme in Canadian history, which we'll get to in later videos. But that's basically the idea. Whereas the upper house, it's population-based. The lower house, the lower house is population-based. The upper house is regionally based to counterbalance that. Now, whether in practice in 2015 that's still the case is a completely different story, but that's the reason why this was created. So for a bill to become law, the lower house, a majority of the lower house has to agree, a majority of the upper house has to agree, then Parliament agrees, once these two agree, and then the sovereign has to give royal assent. Once all these three elements are done, the Legislative Assembly has passed a law, so it passes laws. The executive branch of government is the branch of government that enforces laws. And the executive is made up of a few elements. First is the sovereign as well. And the sovereign isn't too important in this case. It's made up of the Governor General, who is, well, the Queen, who is the Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Forces. But in reality, it's the Prime Minister that tells the Canadian Forces what to do. And so that's number one. number 2 here, we'll put PM. So the Prime Minister. Today, that's Prime Minister Stephen Harper. So the Prime Minister of Canada. And 3, I'll put Cabinet. And Cabinet is the head of each department. So for example, we have the Department of National Defense. So I'll put MND. Then we'd have the Department of Environment, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and we'd have a lot of different departments in Canada. And the head of each department sits around a table called Cabinet, and the Prime Minister chairs that table. And they decide on what direction to take the country in. But they can't do whatever they want. They have to work within the confines of Canadian laws, which were again passed by the legislative branch of government. So already there we see the connection or the interaction between the different levels of government. So whereas the legislative branch passes the laws, the executive enforces the laws that were passed by the legislative branch. And they also work within these laws to bring the country to a certain direction. For example, the creation of a free trade agreement with Europe. But they could only act within the confines of Canadian law, and that's really important. And that brings us to our third branch of government. The judicial branch of government is the branch of government that interprets laws. And basically, that's the court system in Canada. And the court system, this is not a full list of the whole court system in Canada, but it gives you a little idea of how it works. And the most important thing to note is that we have provincial courts on one side and federal courts on the other side. So these are the provincial courts of appeal, the federal court, and the federal court of appeal. And everything in Canada leads to the Supreme Court of Canada. And I put a line in the middle just so you know that you can't jump from the federal court to the provincial courts, or you can't go from the provincial courts to the federal courts. Everything, though, funnels to the SCC, the Supreme Court of Canada. And the reason one of the reasons for that is to ensure that all laws in Canada or the federal laws in Canada, I should say, are uniformly applied across the country. So we have one court in Canada, the Supreme Court, that takes on cases from all other court systems, even ones that I haven't showed here. And that's important because it really gives uniform application to laws in Canada. And in videos to come, I'll go more into that, and we'll go more into what the court system is like in Canada. But just to tell you that by enforcing the law, or by interpreting the laws in Canada, they give meaning to laws. So here I'll put interpreting laws. So they interpret laws in Canada, and by interpreting it, they give meaning to those laws. So basically, the legislative branch of government is the one that passes the laws, which are then enforced by the executive branch of government. And the judicial branch of government interprets the laws, and by interpreting the laws, it gives meaning to the laws. The words might mean different things to different people, but the judiciary gives a final say on what the words mean. And that creates legal certainty in Canada, the rule of law. And we'll go into these terms in videos to come, but this one was really to give you a broad idea of what the three branches of government are and how they interact with each other. I hope you enjoyed it and that was useful, and have a good night.